Words and birds, birds and words. This is an Avian Avarice book review.
Dan and Rob from Avian Avarice here, and we're coming to you today with a book review of Bird City by Ryan Goldberg. And the way we came to do this was that we actually have an acquaintance who knows Ryan, and that acquaintance, his name is Chapman, he suggested that we read this book and we review it. So, Ryan, if you know Chapman, give him a pat on the back because we're doing this because of him.
Yeah, so we won't go through the whole thing here, but just to give a brief summary here, an infectiously impassioned tour of the 5 New York City boroughs that offer city dwellers and bird lovers everywhere a surprising, delightful, new view of the concrete jungle through its abundant and diverse bird population.
It's a pretty good summary. What did you think of the book, Rob?
I mean, overall, I thought it was a pretty good read. When I'm, I am a North Jersey, born, bred, raised, now live in South Jersey. So for me, it's one of those things where I think I intentionally went to the city maybe 3 times growing up, and I think all were like Rockefeller Center, like Christmas time, like stuff. So it was very interesting for me to kind of read someone who kind of, grew up in the area, got introduced to birds, and kind of was re-exploring or rediscovering his own city, while it was actively, occurring in his own life. So it was interesting for me to read that, and I thought it was a good read overall. He's excellent storyteller, kind of is able to weave tale to tale to explain bigger topics, and, just found it to be genuinely entertaining.
Yeah. I didn't get what I expected from the book. My kind of an initial expectation was, okay, here's going to be this city guy who's telling us about, like, he's seeing some starlings and pigeons and, and there wasn't actually a chapter about that, which I thought was kind of interesting, but there was obviously far more to it than that. And, I'll say, to get into some specifics, the first chapter has to do with the Christmas bird count. And when I was reading it, we were actually getting ready for our Christmas bird count. So that was very timely, and I actually, this is probably my favorite chapter, even though it was the first chapter. Yeah. Really liked that chapter, and it was really relatable. Like, a lot of the things that he did and talked about in the chapter made me feel like, oh yeah, I've done that too. I know exactly what you're talking about. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, overall, the whole book definitely taught me some things that I didn't know about the city and about birding, but also there were a lot of things that I was kind of like, well, that figures. So, it was a book that made me feel positive and negative at different points along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Did you have a particular, like, a favorite part or like a highlight?
I don't know if I had necessarily a favorite part per se. Like, in general, it's very hard for me to say favorites about almost anything. Like, my entire family is, you ask us what our favorite cookie is, and it's like, well, are we talking like in the realm of chocolate chip? Are we talking in the realm of like oatmeal? Like, give me like something a little more specific to go off of. So I don't necessarily view it as that. I think there was a lot of poignant moments where I think sometimes just the things that happen in the birding world inherently put you in the middle of 2 different worlds coming to a head. And sometimes that's, just economically, sometimes that's in this natural sense, sometimes that's geopolitical sense. There's a lot of those kind of moments where there's a lot of bittersweet things. You're getting to see something very cool, but the reason you're seeing it is because some other bigger tragedy is happening, and that's why it's even in your area or something of that nature. So I felt like there was a couple standout points in that regard. So not necessarily favorite parts, but points that were just particularly poignant, to me in that regard.
Yeah. We had talked before about one of the things that stuck out to us the most was some of the Birdstrike. There were really 2 chapters on Birdstrike, birds hitting buildings and dying from collisions. And one of them focused on buildings in general, and the other one kind of focused more on specifically the Tribune and Light, which, for those of you who are not in the New York City area, on 9/11, there's a spotlight that is projected into the sky, and it serves as a beacon for birds as well, and a lot of them get trapped in the light and then end up basically flying until they exhaust themselves. So those 2 chapters were really difficult to get through, and there were, basically talked a lot about how many birds were dying in the process of colliding with buildings or dying from exhaustion. And that was, I'd say, some of the more powerful parts of the book, but also some of the harder parts to get through. What did you think about those?
Yeah, because ultimately, I think part of the struggle is, at least from what I can understand of even the author's take on it, is that, it's a tribute in light, right? So it is a symbol of a terrible national tragedy that occurred, and then trying to appropriately honor those people while also honoring the first responders that were at the scene, sacrificing themselves, trying to help others. And it seems like such a benign thing to do, to just have these 2, literal towers of light to try and be a memorandum, and then also just being a general beacon of hope and resilience of the city and the people that were there. And then these unintended consequences of, causing all these other things in regards to birds. And it was even the author kind of grappling with the seeming understanding of just the importance of having large symbolic features and memorances like that, while also then having to deal with the very real world consequence of some of the loss that's occurring of the avifauna and et cetera that in that area. So it was kind of, and I think that's where a lot of us end up with different things of things that end up happening, and not necessarily in the sense of a tribute like that, but even just other initiatives that people are trying to do for environmental causes or something like that. Think of wind farms and bird strikes that happen during that. You're trying to inherently trying to do something that you think is going to be good, and again, it's also having a lot of these unintended consequences of death and everything else. So it's I feel like I said again, that's for me one of those poignant parts that the book has brought up in different areas and different things, of where you just have these collisions of 2 different worlds coming together, and just having to deal with all of the little detail and nuance of the consequence and benefits of all those things.
Yeah. One thing that he talks about a lot in those chapters that I really found valuable was how there's so many people who are involved in trying to make a positive change, because of the bird strike. Mm-hmm. So he talks a lot about a lot of volunteers, a lot of them by name, a lot of things about New York City Bird Alliance, and how these various initiatives were put together to try to lobby the city or other cities to make buildings more bird friendly and bird safe, mm-hmm. by altering the glass or the designs or things like that. And the big takeaway for me from a lot of those chapters was that there are people out there who are putting in a lot of effort and a lot of time to try to make a positive impact, and that in some cases positive impacts are actually happening. So in the middle of these chapters that were really about a lot of really negative things, there's this positive aspect of there's people who care and are trying to make it work. And to transition a little bit too into, there's a chapter on birding in the Bronx, which was sort of a surprise to me. But that one talked a lot about what goes on in the Bronx River and some of the cleanups that have taken place there. And same thing, here's this horror story of all of the bad things that have happened to the river. Mm-hmm. And then here's these people who come along and have invested so much time and energy and so much of their lives into trying to bring awareness and then actually do cleanups and all of that. And so I really appreciated that part of the book, because it makes you feel like there's somebody who cares besides just you, right? We're reading this book because we like birds, obviously. So there's other people out there who they feel the same way and they're trying to do the same thing. And even in a place like New York City, which is not the first place you think of when you think of birding, at least not for us.
Yeah. And I think too, certainly, the casual helpers here and there always help, but what was more interesting to me was that the kind of running theme was that it really didn't take an army per se. It was just a few individuals that had long time dedicated records of help. And really that's what it came down to, is that there was a lot of these big impactful movements that occurred just because, again, just a few set individuals that were just unyielding in their persistence of fighting for these causes and then just putting in the work day in, day out.
Yeah.
And that they would be able to come up with this cadre of other people that would then tag along. Again, as you make a point of the Project Safe Flight, where it was again one individual having a particularly bad day and just a seeming horror show of these bird strikes was what ultimately led to a public outcry to then change building codes for new buildings, etc. So those personal tragedies of a few dedicated people have been able to make a lot of positive change.
Yeah. Something else I thought was kind of a recurring theme in this book was, where is the boundary between city and wild?
Yeah.
You got some of that with Flacco and Barry, the two owls that were celebrities. Mm-hmm. You also got some of that with the Jamaica Bay chapter. And that was kind of an interesting, actually I would say uncomfortable for me at times, because I definitely feel like we should probably try to preserve as much wild as we can. And I don't think that the author disagrees with that. But there was just this kind of acceptance of, well, sometimes the wild is in the city and sometimes the city is in the wild. And where do you make that boundary? And that was kind of an interesting thing for me to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird boundary for a lot of people because there's nothing inherently wild about the city at all. It is 100% artificial, almost everywhere. And then there's preservation of like wilder, like areas,
right.
It seems like, and then you kind of tipped into the other theme there too of like, well, what counts as wild more from like even just the actual animals themselves of like, again, you bring up the point like Flacco, and it brings up this like what really is the reality here versus everyone's like perception of things. Flacco escapes, and basically what it seems like was due to a bunch of public pressure, a backing down of the zoo of like, well, it seems like he's doing okay, we're going to stop our efforts. Mm-hmm. He's not a wild animal. He was never meant to be a wild animal. And then, of course, when he passes away, you find out that, well, probably in a very short amount of time, he was going to be dying of one of multiple things.
Right.
Either the infections that he had gotten or the amount of rat poison from his feed that he was consuming.
Right.
And so, like, there's nothing inherently truly wild about those. It's more like, spectacle. And that brings into a whole different conversation about owls in general. And
sure, yeah.
That can be, brought up at a different time. But, yeah, that it seems that everything there is inherently artificial. Now, to me, it seems more like you can have one of two different stances on that. Like I said, I've been to the city maybe 3-4 times growing up for the purpose of like spectacle type of things. There's inherent no inherent draw to me to be in a concrete jungle, quote unquote, as it says in the book. However, that doesn't mean like if you choose to be there, you can't be good stewards of what is there. And I think that's a different mentality to have. And certainly that seems to be what a lot of the, I was going to say characters really, but persons in the book are doing. They're trying to be the best stewards they can of what they have. Now, my take would always be, well, I'd leave the city to go to the countryside and like that's where I live. But if that's not where they're at, I get it. There's certainly that balance of the convenience of being able to just go downstairs and how much that means for whatever convenience compared to what what they're getting of the wild. But like I said, you can still be a good steward of the things that you do have, and there's certainly a lot of individuals doing that. So that is a weird line that seems not so much a line so much as a bunch of gray between two extremes.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I'm kind of on the same boat in terms of I would rather be in the countryside for whatever reason, to live, to bird, whatever. Yeah. I do go to the city a bit more often. Yeah. I find myself at Yankee Stadium about twice a year, so that's a little different. But and listen, Mr. Ryan, if you are watching this, hey man, invite us out. Convince us that we should be birding Central Park or Breezy Point or something. You could get in touch with us, and if you want, we'll take the day off. We'll meet you somewhere, and you could change our minds. But yeah, I mean, the Flacco thing to me was like such a difficult pill to swallow, because it's like, here's this bird, which I agree with you, like, it's not a wild bird. There's no reason why anyone should think it would survive.
Yeah.
And just when it looks like it's going to somehow find a way to rewild itself,
Yeah.
the city's irony comes and just kills it. Like, the very food that you need to eat. Which, funny enough, like, a lot of them are Norway rats, which are actually its own prey back where it belongs.
Yeah.
And yet, it's going to still get killed from eating them. And twice in the book, the author uses the sentence, "What kind of city is this?" And he's referring to the fact that there's just ecologically negative things happening. And I mean, like, that's kind of my feeling often about the city, or cities in general. What is this? Why? What kind of place is this that we would do these types of things to the environment in those places? But, you know, it is interesting, of course, that those things are, like Barry. I had no idea that there was ever a barn owl that was hanging out in New York City. That was kind of amazing to me. And obviously that's different than Flacco. That bird was there on its own.
Yeah.
Really wild.
And again, still its own spectacle, and you know, like I said, I mean, I guess that kind of brings in at least some of the conversation of owls, of like, you know, it brings up other themes in the book too that are more universal even outside of the city. And one of those they bring up is this, you know, owl code,
right?
Which is something I always inherently struggle with as just being a birder in general. Of like, you know, owls are such an awesome animal in general, and could be just real, you know, motivators for a lot of people to get interested in birds. And like, you know, they talk about spark birds and all this other thing, that people that birds that get them interested in first going out and being excited about seeing birds in their native habitat in the wild. And like, I just have this inherent problem with, I basically hate any like hoity-toity anything, like,
yeah.
And that's this upper echelon versus all like the others. And like, it seems like that is one of the topics that constantly comes up under the guise of protecting the birds, and there's always somewhere in the middle of like,
right,
you know, kind of that showing up. So it's fun to, I guess, see that, and again, a completely different setting, to the point where two boroughs are completely pitted against each other in how they handle it, which is very interesting to see how that plays out in, you know, a city with like almost mafia rules. It's I believe roughly quoted in one borough, and then just completely like loosey-goosey in the other.
Yeah. And that you know, like, that's a universal issue, I feel like, at least around here with dealing with owls, which, I'm trying to go down two roads at once here. I mean, one part of this book that was great was that it kind of shows you how birders, wherever they are kind of the same.
Yeah.
But also that particular issue just really kind of baffles me. Like, we don't share where owls are located when we find them because of exactly this. And because they're sensitive, and because photographers get in there, they're taking a million pictures, and they scare the birds off, and the stress and all that. So that is the practice that we practice. However, I mean, like, it just doesn't seem like everybody agrees, and I don't know how much of it is actual scientific proof and how much of it is just what people think.
Yeah.
I read a book by a guy named Sean Dooley, who was the big ear holder in Australia for a while. And in his book, the way he describes owling in Australia is like, basically, if you don't spotlight the bird and see it and you only hear it, it doesn't count. So, like, at least according to him, it seems like in Australia the practice is you spotlight everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's photo jacks.
Yeah.
And it's just weird to think that in some places that's normal and acceptable, but here we feel like that's like the cardinal sin, you know?
Yeah. And then, again, I guess the other echelon of that, you know, the one persona in here, the owl whisperer.
Yes.
Right? So again, that gets into more of this upper echelon thing of, you know, it's one of those things where it's just it's a weird culture in the fact of, if you went out and you put in the work to go find a bird, then I get it. Like, you put in the work and you can kind of share the information. But again, then the selective choosing of who you're getting based on almost a status thing is just like, it's such a weird, like, social line of, again, like, these guys could be the ambassadors of the entire interest of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And again, just to like this, it's just a weird line of this otherness versus this like, again, upper echelon versus like a treasure for all to have within a reasonable amount of
well, and it's also funny because
access.
like in the book he talks about how, you know, there's the owl whisperer and he finds these birds and they're like, you know, secret, it's taboo to ask about them.
Yeah.
But then he writes in the book about how the owl whisperer shows a bunch of people where the owl is. you know?
Well, but then he also makes the point of, even in the book, there's the one part where he finally gets to have a conversation with the owl whisperer, and he's with another associate of his who he thinks highly of, and he's being whisked away by the owl whisperer to this, and he looks back, and there was, I think, a young couple, I think he had said, and they had asked, like, oh, where they're going to, and he never got to hear his own acquaintance's reply. Like, at that point, it was, like, muffled. And whether he did or not, or that's creative license, like, I leave that to the author, and, you know, that type of thing. But, again, it's exactly that. Whereas, like, those were potentially new birders where that could have been the spark of all sorts of, you know, things. You know, when people get introduced to a hobby or a life passion, again, it's sometimes those moments that are missed because others didn't think they were, like, ready for it, versus you have no idea.
I think at the end of the day, we both definitely enjoyed this book. For me, I feel like this was a great summary of a year of birding in the Northeast and in New York City specifically. I think if you're a new birder, this is a great book to learn a lot about like what a birding year is like, what kinds of things you focus on typically in each month, and what kinds of things are highlights throughout the year. I enjoyed reading all of that because, you know, at any time you read the book, it's one particular time. So for me, it was November, and I enjoyed reading about migration in the spring and hawk watching in the fall and things like that. Things that you have to wait a couple more months to go experience again. So it was like the highlight reel of birding. And if you've never experienced that before, it's a great thing to read about. And if you have experienced it before, you're going to enjoy kind of reminiscing and relating to somebody else who's going through the same things that you do in a year. Rob, why would you recommend this book to someone?
I would recommend the book to someone, again, for similar thoughts, like the idea of, like, it really kind of perfectly encapsulates birding in, like, the Northeast in general. I mean, it has a specific take on the city, but again, someone who's not a city dweller by any means, it was nice to hear how people just from very different walks of life from it, like, you know, the author mentions, I think, briefly of, I think just in passing, like, atheists, some of the other things that are commentary in it. It seems like he's more left-leaning his views. I tend to be more conservative in, like, my views. There's another character in there, the guardian, who is living on a house on a marshy kind of area, who, you know, you go in and he's got all these different, like, Hindu god trinkets, and who also, I believe, has, like, a background where he's not particularly religious, but was, like, raised, I think, in a Catholic school. And, you know, he gets questioned, well, I thought you weren't religious. Well, you know, I'm hedging my bets. And, like, it's just so fun to see people from just very different walks of life kind of all have this one thing in common, where they can bond, they can come together in ways that, and groups of people that may not normally come together, and especially in today's world, be so factioned, you know, and segregated in society, that it allows a view into a world of how something as simple as going outside and just seeing nature in and of itself, in whatever way you get to experience that, can bring a bunch of people together. And so for me, the storytelling aspect of it, I thought it was well written. It weaves seamlessly from, you know, month to month, season to season. The characters that are involved, like, we all know someone that is kind of like one of these people described. There's a version of that almost everywhere you go.
And we do actually know some of the names from the book too.
Correct.
Which is interesting.
Correct. Which is, again, if you're from the area that we're from, like, you do hear of some of these people in various things, if you don't necessarily interact with them personally. But again, those local characters of that, you know, theme kind of get carried through the way. So I think it's just very entertaining. It goes into some details about specific birds for those that might be newer to birds and may not, you know, might be just concerned that they're going to get way too deep and not learn a little bit about birds. It kind of is nice, because I think when I got into birds, it's really just going out and looking and just, like, seeing things with no really thought or care. And this is kind of a good intro to, like, maybe something that's a little more methodical and a little bit more holistic into kind of bringing that hobby into a kind of greater scope as to like what you can get involved in, what things are available, and then also again almost a systematic approach as to how you get it. So there's a treasure trove of things in there, I think, for people regardless of kind of their experience in the hobby.
At the end of the day, I think we could both agree. We both enjoyed Bird City by Ryan Goldberg. We both fully recommend it. If you're a birder, experienced or novice, if you just like natural history, or if you're just interested in New York City, this book has something for you. It's a great read, it's well written, and we give it 2 thumbs up.
Yeah.
So really, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
I guess one of these is going to work.